Andre Morrison sat at the kitchen counter late that Tuesday night, holding a pen that felt heavier than it should.
I know this looks bad,
The
but
granite
please, let me
surface
explain.
stretched between
Explain
them
what?
like a
More empty
courtroom
promises?
bench,
This time is different, I
cold and
swear.
unforgiving under the recessed
I knew
lights
this
that
had to
hummed
happen.
their quiet judgment.
We have to act now.
Across from him, his wife stood with arms folded, posture relaxed in silk pajamas that cost more than his first month's rent a decade ago. The house smelled like lemon cleaner, and the leftovers neither of them had touched. The kind of scent that always meant decisions had already been made without him. Simone slid the papers closer, her manicured finger tapping the signature line with practiced precision. The thin smile on her face carried the confidence of someone who believed she had already won every argument that mattered. "You can take your time. I know this is probably the biggest decision you'll ever make." Andre did not look up as he read the first page slowly, even though he had already memorized every clause twice in the car before coming inside. The words blurred not from difficulty, but from the weight of what they represented. 10 years compressed into legal terminology. A decade reduced to asset division and equitable distribution. Simone let out a quiet laugh that carried no humor, only the sharp edge of impatience worn thin. "You see, this is exactly why we're here, Andre. You move slow, you think slow, and life keeps passing you by while you sit there analyzing every little detail." Andre finally lifted his eyes and met hers across the counter, his expression calm despite the pressure building in his chest. "I've never been afraid of time." Simone rolled her eyes and leaned against the counter, shifting her weight like someone settling in for a familiar speech she had rehearsed too many times. "Time has already decided for you. You're almost 40 years old and still chasing opportunities that never come. Still talking about potential like it pays the mortgage. Still working those long hours that lead absolutely nowhere." She tapped the paper again with one perfectly manicured finger, the sound sharp against the silence. "Sign it. This way we can both move on with our lives. I refuse to stay married to a man with no direction, no ambition, no future." Andre listened without reacting the way he always did when Simone spoke in this tone. She had perfected it over the years, not angry enough to be called cruel, not shouting enough to be called abusive, just sharp enough to cut deep and leave no visible scars. Simone lowered her voice, aiming for something that might have sounded like concern if the words themselves had not been chosen so carefully to wound. "What hurts most is that I gave you years. I believed in you when nobody else did. While my friends built careers and married men with real ambition and moved into better lives with actual futures, I stayed. I stood here in this same house, watching you come home every single night looking tired and empty-handed." Andre felt the familiar pressure in his chest, the tightness that came from swallowing words he could say, but chose not to. He placed the pen down slowly on the counter, the small click of it settling somehow louder than it should have been. "You never asked what I did today." Simone laughed again, fuller this time, the sound echoing off the kitchen cabinets, like she had been waiting for exactly this opening. "Because I already know, Andre. You went to another meeting that led nowhere. Another handshake that promised maybe someday. Another presentation that impressed nobody who matters. I'm done waiting for miracles that never arrive." Andre nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a point made in a boardroom negotiation, rather than his marriage ending. "What if I told you something changed today?" Simone smirked and turned toward the sink, pouring herself a glass of water with deliberate slowness that communicated how little his words affected her anymore. "Then I would tell you I'm done believing stories. I've heard every version of hope you can sell, and none of them ever paid off. Not one." What Simone did not know, what she could not have known because Andre had kept it locked behind NDAs and professional silence, was that 12 hours earlier, at 11 o'clock that morning, Andre had signed a $700 million acquisition deal. He had walked into a boardroom in downtown Chicago with 3 years of negotiations behind him and emerged as CEO of Titan Logistics North America Division. The wire transfer would release at 8 the following morning. The press conference would announce his name to the financial world at 10, and by the time the sun rose on Wednesday, the man she called worthless would no longer belong to the life she thought she controlled. But Andre said none of this as he picked up the pen again. His hand remained steady, despite everything coursing through his mind. He thought back to the morning meeting, the boardroom silence before the vote, the moment every executive in the room had stood and shaken his hand. $700 million. Closed. Final. Complete. Simone watched him sign, her confidence growing with each stroke of his pen across the pages. There it is. Reality. Finally. Andre signed the last page carefully at 11:47 p.m., his signature the same clear script he had used on the acquisition documents that morning. He slid the papers back across the counter toward her waiting hands. "I'll pack tonight." Simone exhaled in visible relief, her shoulders dropping as tension she had been carrying released all at once. "Good. I have an early meeting tomorrow, and I don't want any drama or drawn-out goodbyes." Andre stood slowly, feeling somehow taller despite the moment, lighter despite the weight of what had just ended. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he had draped it hours ago, when he still thought tonight might go differently. As he reached the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, Simone spoke again without looking at him, her eyes fixed on the papers she was already organizing into the manila folder. "I hope you find something eventually, Andre. I really do. Because I'm done carrying dead weight." Andre paused at the threshold, but did not turn around. The words hung in the air between them, final and irreversible. "You never carried me. You just stood in front of me." He stepped outside into the October night air, where his phone vibrated once in his pocket. The screen lit up with a single message that would mean nothing to anyone watching, but everything to the man reading it. "Congratulations. Funds confirmed for morning release. Press conference, 10 a.m. You earned this." Andre looked back once at the house through the kitchen window, the lights still on, the papers still on the counter. Simone already on her phone, probably texting her mother or friends about her liberation. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Andre smiled. 10 years earlier, Andre Morrison had been 29 years old and working 16-hour days in a cramped apartment on the south side of Chicago. The place smelled like instant ramen and coffee that had been reheated too many times, with a single window that looked out over a parking lot where broken streetlights left more shadows than illumination. He worked as a junior software engineer for a supply chain startup that operated out of converted warehouse space, the kind of company where everyone wore multiple hats because hiring actual specialists cost money nobody had. The tech conference where he met Simone had been his first time presenting in front of more than 20 people. His hands had shaken, holding the laser pointer as he walked through slides explaining his logistics optimization algorithm, a piece of software he had built during sleepless nights, fueled by the belief that efficiency could be measured and improved through predictive modeling. The audience of 75 people had seemed enormous then, their faces mostly blank as he stumbled through technical explanations of route optimization and inventory prediction. Simone had been sitting in the third row, 27 years old, with a portfolio folder balanced on her lap, and an intensity in her eyes that suggested she was taking notes not just on the presentation, but on the presenter himself. She had grown up in Detroit in a neighborhood where ambition meant finding a way out, where her mother cleaned houses and her father drove trucks, and both of them dreamed their daughter would never have to do either. Marketing had seemed like the ticket to something better, a career where persuasion mattered more than manual labor, where the right pitch could open doors that hard work alone never reached. After his presentation, Andre had stood awkwardly by the coffee station, watching other speakers network with ease he did not possess. Simone had approached with her business card already in hand, her smile bright and her handshake firm. "That algorithm you built, how scalable is it?" Andre had blinked, surprised anyone had actually listened beyond the nervous delivery. "Theoretically, it could handle supply chains 10 times the size we're currently running. But we don't have the client base for yet. You don't have the client base yet." She had tilted her head, studying him with an expression that mixed calculation and genuine interest in ways he could not quite separate. "You know what your problem is? You built something brilliant, and you have no idea how to sell it. You just spent 20 minutes explaining technical specifications to a room full of people who don't care about code. They care about results." Andre had felt his defenses rising, but found himself curious instead of offended. "And you could sell it better?" "I could sell the idea of it, the vision, the future where companies save millions because of what you build. That's what people buy, not algorithms, outcomes." They had talked for an hour in that hotel conference room long after other attendees had filtered out to evening networking events. Simone had sketched out a pitch strategy on napkins, her energy infectious as she transformed his technical achievement into a narrative about revolutionizing an entire industry. Andre had found himself drawn not just to her ideas, but to her certainty. The way she spoke about success, as if it was simply a matter of execution rather than luck. Their partnership had started professionally before it became personal. Simone helped him refine his presentations, taught him how to lead with benefits instead of features, how to read a room and adjust his message to what people needed to hear, rather than what he wanted to say. Within 6 months, their startup had landed its first major client, a regional distributor that saw 22% cost reduction in the first quarter of implementation. Within a year, they were dating. Within 2 years, revenue hit $5 million annually, and Andre's position shifted from junior engineer to lead developer. Within 3 years, standing in the same converted warehouse where they had first worked side by side, Andre had proposed with a ring he had saved 8 months to afford. Simone had said yes without hesitation, her eyes bright with tears that seemed genuine in ways Andre never thought to question. "Always together. That's how we do this. Always together." They married that spring in a small ceremony neither could really afford, but both insisted on having. The photo showed 2 people who believed they were building something permanent, who thought partnership meant weathering anything as long as they faced it as a team. Andre's father had attended, despite his failing health, pulling his son aside during the reception to offer words Andre still carried. "Son, patience isn't waiting for something to happen. It's working in silence while everyone else doubts you. Your mother left because she couldn't see what I was building. She needed proof before belief. Don't let that define your story." Andre had nodded, not fully understanding the warning hidden in the blessing. His father had died 8 months later, leaving behind a journal filled with observations about character, integrity, and the difference between those who build for applause and those who build for legacy. Years 4 and 5 had been good ones, the kind Andre would remember later with the painful clarity of contrast. Late nights in the garage of their first real house, Simone bringing him coffee while he debugged code, her hand resting on his shoulder as they watched revenue projections climb. Celebrating their first 7-figure contract by ordering pizza and dancing in the kitchen to music playing from a phone speaker. Small moments that felt enormous because they were shared. But somewhere around year 6, the foundation began to crack in ways Andre did not recognize as structural damage until much later. Simone's college friends started posting photos of luxury vacations and new cars, engagement rings with stones that caught light from across social media feeds, husbands who worked in finance or medicine or real estate development. The comparison started subtly, mentioned in passing during conversations that felt casual, until Andre recognized the pattern. Jessica's husband just made partner at his firm. They're looking at houses in Lincoln Park. Did you see Tanya's post? They're spending Christmas in Aspen. Must be nice to have that kind of flexibility. Rachel's engagement ring is gorgeous, 3 carats. Her fiancé works in private equity. Andre would respond with something non-committal, focused on his work while Simone scrolled through feeds that seemed to illuminate everything their life was not. He was working longer hours by then, having caught the attention of Richard Walsh, the CEO of Titan Logistics, who saw potential in Andre's optimization software that extended far beyond regional distribution. Walsh had started inviting Andre to strategy meetings, asking questions that probed not just technical capability, but vision, the ability to see how technology could reshape an entire sector. Andre could not discuss these meetings with Simone. Walsh had been explicit about confidentiality, about the need for discretion as they explored whether a larger partnership might be possible. The non-disclosure agreements were standard but restrictive, and Andre honored them even as the silence created distance between him and his wife. By year 7, that distance had calcified into something harder. The first public moment of disrespect came at Simone's company holiday gala, a black tie event at a downtown hotel where Andre wore the only suit he owned, an $80 purchase from a department store that fit well enough but lacked the tailored precision of the other men's clothing. Simone had said nothing in the car ride over, but her silence spoke volumes as she adjusted her own dress in the rearview mirror. At the party, when colleagues asked about Andre's work, Simone had smiled with practiced ease and redirected the conversation before he could answer. "He's in tech. It's complicated. How's your team doing this quarter?" Later, standing near the bar, Andre had overheard her talking to 2 women he did not recognize, their laughter carrying over the ambient noise of networking and forced cheer. "Marcus is still figuring things out. You know how it is with startups. Lots of potential, not much payoff yet." The casual dismissal had landed like a physical blow, made worse by the fact that she had used his name wrong, as if he was so interchangeable she could not even keep track of what to call him. Andre had said nothing that night, chalking it up to social anxiety or the pressure she felt to present well in front of her colleagues. By year 8, the pattern was undeniable. Simone stopped attending Andre's work functions entirely, claiming headaches or previous commitments, or simply stating she was too tired to pretend his startup mattered to anyone important. She spoke about his work in past tense, even though he still went to the office every day, still coded through nights and weekends, still met with Walsh to discuss possibilities that were starting to look more concrete, even if he could not yet say how concrete. The breaking point of year 9 came at a dinner with 2 other couples, friends Simone had cultivated from her professional network. The restaurant was upscale in ways that made Andre acutely aware of every dollar on the menu, though he said nothing about the cost when Simone ordered the second most expensive wine. Conversation flowed around topics Andre could not contribute to meaningfully: real estate investments and vacation home rentals, and the politics of private school admissions. Then one of the men, a consultant whose name Andre had already forgotten, turned to him with the polite interest of someone making conversation out of obligation. "So, Andre, Simone mentioned you're in software. How's business?" Before Andre could respond, Simone had jumped in with a laugh that tried too hard to sound light-hearted. "Let's not talk about work. Nothing new there anyway. Tell us more about your trip to Barcelona." The table had moved on, but Andre had stopped listening. He excused himself to the bathroom and did not return to the table for 20 minutes, standing in the restaurant hallway trying to process the casual cruelty of being erased in front of strangers. When he came back, Simone had barely noticed his absence, deep in conversation about interior design trends. They had driven home in silence that night, Andre staring out the window at Chicago streets he had known his entire life, wondering when exactly his wife had stopped seeing him as a partner and started seeing him as a burden she was too polite to acknowledge in private, but too exhausted to defend in public. Year 10 arrived with the weight of accumulated disappointments, though Andre kept working because the work itself still mattered, even if Simone no longer asked about it. Walsh had formally approached him 6 months earlier with news that changed everything, but which Andre could share with no one. Titan Logistics wanted to acquire the supply chain technology Andre had built, integrating it into their nationwide network and scaling it across operations that spanned 42 states. The deal was complex, requiring months of negotiation, due diligence, board approvals, and legal review. Walsh had been explicit about confidentiality during the entire process. Andre, this deal could be worth hundreds of millions if we structure it right, but it's fragile. Competitors would kill to know what we're planning. Family, friends, spouse, everyone stays in the dark until we announce. Can you do that? Andre had agreed without hesitation, signing NDAs that legally bound his silence. He understood the stakes, understood that premature disclosure could crater valuations or invite competing bids that would complicate everything. So he worked in silence, attending marathon negotiation sessions disguised as routine business meetings, reviewing contracts in his home office with the door closed, fielding calls from lawyers and accountants and board members, while Simone assumed he was simply working late on the same small-scale projects he had been grinding on for years. The irony was not lost on him. The more success built behind the scenes, the more Simone assumed he was failing. His long hours looked like desperation rather than dedication. His exhaustion seemed like defeat rather than the toll of managing a deal that would define his career. His silence about work appeared to confirm her narrative that nothing important was happening, when in reality, everything important was happening just outside her awareness. 3 weeks before the divorce papers, Andre had been in final acquisition talks. Titan Logistics board members flew in from New York and California for a marathon session that lasted 14 hours, hammering out the last details of purchase price, equity distribution, and Andre's role in the merged entity. The numbers being discussed were staggering: $700 million for full acquisition, with Andre retaining 15% equity and assuming CEO responsibilities for the North American division. He had come home at midnight that Tuesday, finding Simone already asleep, her phone still glowing on the nightstand with unread messages. Andre had stood in the doorway of their bedroom, watching her sleep, wondering if he should wake her and tell her everything. NDA consequences be damned. But something had stopped him. A growing realization that if she loved him, truly loved him, she would not need the number in his bank account to justify staying. The next morning, over coffee, Andre had tried again to bridge the distance between them without violating the confidentiality that protected the deal. Can we talk? Really talk about where we are? Simone had barely looked up from her phone, scrolling through emails or messages or whatever digital distraction currently held more interest than her husband. About what, Andre? Your excuses for why nothing ever changes? I've heard them all. What if something is changing? What if I just can't tell you yet because why? Because you signed another NDA for another opportunity that's going to fall through? I'm tired of maybes. I need certainty. Andre had let it drop, recognizing the futility of trying to explain what he was legally forbidden from disclosing and emotionally exhausted from defending. He went to work that day carrying the weight of knowing his marriage was ending while his career was ascending, two trajectories moving in opposite directions with a precision that felt almost mathematically predetermined. 2 weeks before the papers, Simone had stayed out until after midnight 3 nights in a row. When Andre asked where she had been, she responded with accusations disguised as questions. Why do you care? You're never really here anyway, even when you're physically home. Your mind is always somewhere else, working on projects that never amount to anything. Andre had absorbed the words without responding, too tired to fight battles that seemed designed to prove points he no longer cared to contest. He knew where his mind was, even if he could not tell her. He knew what he was building, even if she refused to see it. 1 week before the papers, the Titan Logistics board had given unanimous approval for the acquisition. Walsh called Andre personally to deliver the news. It's done. Board voted 19-0 in favor. We're targeting Tuesday for final signatures, Wednesday for the announcement. Start thinking about what you want to say to the press. Andre had taken the call in his car outside a grocery store, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks in his palms. $700 million. CEO position. Everything he had worked toward for 3 years about to become public knowledge. And sitting at home was a wife who had already decided he would never amount to anything. That night, Simone had asked him to pick up dinner on his way home. When he arrived with Thai food from her favorite restaurant, she had complained that he should have known she wanted Chinese instead. Tuesday morning arrived with October sunlight filtering through the bedroom blinds in stripes that divided the room into sections of light and shadow. Andre dressed carefully in his only good suit, the one Simone had always dismissed as too cheap for important occasions. He knotted his tie 3 times before getting it right, his hands steadier than they had been in weeks, despite what the day held. Simone was already gone when he left the house, off to her own job, where she managed marketing campaigns for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company. She had not said goodbye, had not asked where he was going in a suit on a Tuesday morning, had not noticed anything unusual, because nothing about Andre registered as unusual anymore. The drive to downtown Chicago took 40 minutes through morning traffic that crawled and stopped and crawled again. Andre spent it listening to a podcast about legacy and leadership, absorbing words about building things that outlast temporary recognition. The Titan Logistics building rose 42 stories into a sky that threatened rain, all glass and steel reflecting the city back at itself. Richard Walsh met him in the lobby with a handshake that conveyed pride and respect in equal measure. At 68, Walsh carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had built something lasting and was now ensuring it continued beyond his own tenure. Gray hair cut short, blue eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had seen potential in Andre when others saw only another engineer with good ideas. Ready to make history? Andre nodded, finding his voice steady. As ready as I'll ever be. The boardroom on the 41st floor had windows that overlooked Lake Michigan, stretching toward a horizon where water met sky in shades of gray that matched the day's mood. 19 board members sat around an oval table made of wood that probably cost more than Andre's first car. Lawyers flanked both sides with contracts stacked in binders thick enough to serve as weapons. The meeting lasted 2 hours, but felt both longer and shorter simultaneously, time behaving strangely under the weight of what was being decided. Andre presented one final time, walking the board through implementation timelines and integration strategies and 5-year projections that showed exactly how his technology would transform their operations. Questions came carefully worded and precisely aimed, testing his knowledge and his vision in ways that would have terrified him 3 years earlier, but now felt like validation. At 11 o'clock Tuesday morning, the board chairman called for the final vote. Hands rose in unanimous agreement. Papers were signed in triplicate. Pens moved across signature lines with the weight of legal binding and financial consequence. $700 million. Acquisition complete. Andre Morrison named CEO of Titan Logistics North America Division, effective immediately. The room stood and applauded, a gesture Andre had not expected and did not quite know how to receive. Walsh gripped his shoulder with genuine affection. Your father would be proud. Hell, I'm proud. You earned every bit of this. Andre's phone buzzed with confirmation from the legal team. Wire transfer processing for Wednesday morning release at 8 a.m. Press conference scheduled for 10 a.m. Media briefings being prepared. The machinery of corporate announcement grinding into motion with the inevitability of machinery that had been built to handle exactly this kind of moment. Andre thought of Simone as he signed the last document. She would be at her desk right now, probably reviewing campaign materials or attending a meeting about Q4 targets. She had no idea that her husband had just signed a deal that would make headlines in business sections across the country. She had no idea because she had never asked, never looked, never seen him as anything other than the failure she had decided he was. The champagne toast in the boardroom tasted expensive in ways Andre could not quite define. Bubbles that somehow felt different when celebrating 8 figures instead of 4. He stayed for an hour of congratulations and backslapping and discussion of next steps before excusing himself to process alone what had just happened. Walsh walked him to the elevator with final words that landed harder than they should have. Andre, success doesn't change who you are. It just reveals it. Make sure the people around you understand that distinction. The elevator ride down 41 floors gave Andre time to check his phone. No messages from Simone. No calls. No indication she had thought about him at all that day. He walked to his car through parking garage concrete that echoed every footstep, sat in the driver's seat, and let the magnitude of the morning settle over him like weight he had not expected to feel. He could tell Simone tonight, walk in, announce what happened, watch her face change as she recalculated everything she had assumed about their life together. Part of him wanted that moment, wanted to see realization dawn that she had been wrong about him in ways that could be measured in $100 million increments. But another part, the part that sounded like his father's voice reading from that journal, reminded him that love should not require a bank balance to justify itself. That if Simone needed proof before belief, then she had already given her answer about what mattered most. Andre drove home through afternoon traffic lighter than the morning rush, arriving at a house that looked exactly as it had when he left it hours earlier. Nothing had changed in the physical space, even though everything had changed in the space between who he had been that morning and who he was now. Simone's car was already in the driveway. Andre walked in through the garage, his briefcase containing documents that represented the most important professional achievement of his life, his head containing the knowledge that his marriage was ending, even if Simone did not know it yet. She sat at the kitchen table with a manila envelope in front of her, the kind of envelope Andre recognized from TV shows and movies as the universal symbol of legal dissolution. Her expression was set with the determination of someone who had made a difficult decision and was committed to seeing it through. Andre placed his briefcase down carefully, buying himself seconds to process what was about to happen. "We need to talk, Andre." He had rehearsed this moment during the drive home, planning how he would tell her about the deal, how he would explain the NDA, how he would offer her the chance to reconsider once she knew the truth. But looking at her face now, at the mixture of resolve and relief in her eyes, Andre realized she did not want the truth. She wanted the ending she had already written. "Okay." Simone took a breath like someone preparing to deliver a speech she had practiced. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about where you're going, or not going, and I can't do this anymore. I can't keep waiting for something that's never going to happen." The words landed exactly as she intended them to, sharp and final, and leaving no room for negotiation. Andre sat down across from her at the table, the same table where they had shared 1,000 meals, and listened as she listed his failures in a voice that grew more confident with each accusation. "You work all these hours and have nothing to show for it. You chase these opportunities that never pay off. You're almost 40, Andre, and we're in the exact same place we were 5 years ago. No growth, no trajectory, no future." Andre could have stopped her at any point, could have said the words that would change everything, that would make her recalculate every assumption she was building her argument on. But he remained silent, watching her perform the ending she needed to believe in. "I gave you everything. My 20s, my early 30s, the years when I could have been building something with someone who actually had ambition. And I stayed because I kept thinking maybe next year would be different. Maybe you'd finally break through. Maybe the work would finally matter." She slid the envelope across the table. "But it won't. I see that now. You are who you are, and that's never going to change." The papers inside were divorce documents, cleanly prepared by a lawyer whose name Andre did not recognize. Standard dissolution of marriage, equitable distribution of assets that amounted to very little when neither party had accumulated much beyond a mortgaged house and retirement accounts that had barely started growing. Andre read through them slowly while Simone watched, her impatience growing as minutes passed without response. The division was straightforward because there was so little to divide. The house would sell, profits split. Retirement accounts separated. No spousal support required since both had incomes. Simple, clean, final. You can take your time. I know this is probably the biggest decision you'll ever make. The condescension in her voice was so familiar, Andre barely registered it anymore. He looked up from the papers and met her eyes across the table. You never asked what I did today. Simone laughed, the sound brittle and rehearsed. Because I already know. Another meeting, another maybe, another day of chasing something that will never come through. Andre nodded slowly, absorbing the confirmation he needed. She would not ask because she did not care. She had decided his story before he could tell it, written his ending before he could write his own. 4 hours later, after Simone had talked herself through every justification for the divorce, after she had listed every way Andre had disappointed her expectations, after she had made clear that she deserved someone who had already arrived rather than someone still building, the papers sat on the counter, waiting for signatures. It was 11:30 at night. The house quiet, except for the hum of appliances and the distant sound of traffic outside. Andre picked up the pen for the second time that day, his hand as steady now as it had been that morning signing documents worth $700 million. He could tell her, right now, could explain that 12 hours ago he had signed the deal that would make her reconsider everything, could watch her face change from certainty to shock to desperate recalculation, could see her try to walk back words she had already spoken, try to unring bells that had already been rung. But Andre thought of his father's journal, the entry about his mother leaving before success arrived, the wisdom about building for yourself rather than for applause. And he made a choice that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with character. If Simone loved him, she would stay regardless of the number in his account. If she needed proof before belief, then she had already told him what mattered most. Some questions answered themselves through the asking. Andre signed the papers at 11:47 p.m., his signature the same clear script he had used that morning. He slid them back across the counter to where Simone stood watching with visible relief. I'll pack tonight. Simone nodded, satisfied in ways that would haunt her later, but felt like liberation now. Good. I have an early meeting tomorrow, and I don't want any drama. Andre stood, feeling the weight of the day settle into his bones with an exhaustion that was somehow freeing. He picked up his jacket and headed for the door, every step carrying him further from a life that no longer fit and closer to one he had already begun building in silence. At the threshold, Simone spoke without looking at him, her attention already on her phone, where she was probably texting friends about her courage in ending a dead-end marriage. I hope you find something eventually, Andre, because I'm done carrying dead weight. Andre paused, letting the words register one final time. Then he responded with the truth she would understand too late. You never carried me. You just stood in front of me. He walked out into the October night, where his phone immediately buzzed in his pocket. The message lit up his screen with confirmation of everything Simone would learn in less than 12 hours. Congratulations. Funds confirmed for morning release. Press conference, 10 a.m. You earned this. Andre looked back through the kitchen window one last time at the life he was leaving behind. Simone, already on her phone, already moving forward into a future she thought would be better without him. The papers on the counter, the pen resting beside them, the signature that ended 10 years in black ink. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Andre Morrison smiled. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of brightness that felt almost accusatory, sunlight cutting through hotel curtains in stripes that divided the unfamiliar room into geometry Andre had not asked for. The alarm on his phone pulled him from sleep that had been surprisingly deep, the kind of rest that comes after carrying weight for so long that putting it down feels like floating. 6 a.m. glowed on the screen beneath a message from Walsh that was both confirmation and command. Car picks you up at 9:15. Suit and tie. We're making history today. Andre sat up in the king-sized bed, taking inventory of where he was and how he had arrived. The Residence Inn near O'Hare had been the closest hotel when he left the house the night before, its generic comfort offering exactly the anonymity he needed. His overnight bag sat on the luggage rack, hastily packed with 2 days of clothing and toiletries grabbed from a bathroom he would probably never see again. The divorce papers were somewhere back at the house, signed and waiting for Simone to file them with a court that would process the end of a marriage with the same bureaucratic efficiency it processed everything else. The shower ran hot enough to fog the mirror completely, steam erasing his reflection until he could have been anyone standing underwater that felt like absolution he had not earned but would accept anyway. Andre dressed with the same methodical care he brought to everything, each movement deliberate, as he buttoned the white shirt and knotted the navy tie he had worn to his father's funeral 7 years earlier. The suit jacket fit better now than it had then, tailored after a promotion that Simone had dismissed as lateral movement because it came without a dramatic salary increase. His wedding ring sat on the nightstand where he had placed it the night before, gold band catching morning light in ways that made it look more valuable than the $200 he had spent on it a decade ago. Andre picked it up, feeling the weight of it against his palm, the physical reminder of promises that had meant everything when they were made, and nothing by the time they were broken. He opened his toiletry bag and dropped the ring inside, zipping it closed with a finality that felt appropriate for an object that no longer served its intended purpose. The drive downtown took him through Wednesday morning traffic that moved with the resigned determination of commuters who had made the same journey too many times to find anything remarkable about it. Lakeshore Drive stretched along water that reflected clouds heavy with the promise of rain that would not arrive until evening, the kind of delayed weather that matched how Andre felt about everything happening around him. Buildings rose in clusters that marked different eras of Chicago architecture, steel and glass towers standing beside brick structures that remembered when this city built things meant to last through fire and flood and economic collapse. Titan Logistics headquarters occupied floors 38 through 42 of a building that had been designed by someone who understood that power could be communicated through elevation and transparency in equal measure. The lobby smelled like expensive coffee, and the particular blend of cologne and ambition that marked corporate spaces where decisions worth millions happened before most people finished their first cup of the morning. Security recognized Andre from the previous day, nodding him through without requesting identification, a small shift that marked the difference between visitor and executive. Walsh met him at the elevator bank on the 38th floor, his gray suit immaculate in ways that suggested either a very good tailor or a very organized spouse who ensured standards were maintained. At 68, Walsh carried himself with the ease of someone who had earned the right to move through corporate spaces without hurrying, who understood that urgency and importance were not synonyms. Sleep well? Andre considered the question, weighing honesty against politeness before landing somewhere between them. Better than expected. Walsh studied him with eyes that had evaluated thousands of negotiations and knew how to read what people were not saying as clearly as what they were. Divorce is never easy, even when it's right. They rode the elevator to 41 in silence, surrounded by mirrors that multiplied their reflections until Andre could not tell which version of himself was real and which was just light bouncing off surfaces designed to make small spaces feel larger. The doors opened onto a hallway where assistants were already at their desks despite the early hour, tapping keyboards and answering phones with the practiced efficiency of people who knew their competence was how they stayed employed. The conference room reserved for the press conference could hold 60 people comfortably and would hold closer to 80 today based on the camera crews already setting up equipment in the back. Reporters Andre recognized from local news networks tested microphones, while producers adjusted lighting that would make everyone look either dignified or washed out, depending on angles that had been calculated down to the degree. A podium stood at the front of the room, bearing the Titan Logistics logo, flanked by American and Illinois state flags that added gravitas through symbolism Andre found simultaneously meaningful and performative. Walsh walked him through the logistics with the same attention to detail he brought to billion-dollar contracts: where to stand, how long to speak, which questions to answer, and which to redirect. The talking points had been prepared by a communications team that understood how to translate corporate acquisition into language the public would care about, focusing on job creation and economic impact rather than shareholder value and market positioning. Remember, this announcement is about more than numbers. It's about what those numbers represent for real people with real families. Lead with that. Andre absorbed the guidance while his mind tracked back to Simone, probably waking up in their bed around this time, reaching for her phone to check messages or social media before her feet hit the floor. She would have no idea what was about to happen, no preparation for the moment when her carefully constructed narrative about her worthless husband would collide with reality documented in press releases and financial filings. Part of Andre wanted to call her, to give her warning that the world was about to shift beneath her assumptions. But that impulse came from a version of himself who believed he owed her protection from consequences she had chosen through actions repeated so many times they had stopped feeling like choices and started feeling like character. The man he was becoming understood that some lessons could only be learned through experiencing them directly, without the buffer of advance notice that might allow for damage control or strategic repositioning. The room filled gradually as 9:30 approached, journalists and photographers claiming seats with the territorial awareness of people who knew where they ranked in the hierarchy of access and influence. Andre recognized a business reporter from the Tribune who had covered the tech sector for 20 years, a woman from Bloomberg who specialized in logistics and supply chain stories, several local television personalities whose faces were more familiar than their names. They chatted among themselves with the easy camaraderie of people who saw each other at these events regularly enough to have developed relationships based on mutual usefulness. Walsh took the podium first at exactly 10 a.m., his timing precise in ways that communicated respect for everyone's schedule while asserting control over the proceedings. He spoke for 8 minutes about Titan Logistics' history, market position, and strategic vision before pivoting to the announcement that had brought cameras and notebooks to a Wednesday morning that would otherwise have been filled with routine coverage of routine business developments. Today, Titan Logistics is proud to announce the acquisition of Morrison Optimization Systems for $700 million, integrating revolutionary supply chain technology that will transform how we serve our clients across North America. The number landed in the room with weight that pulled attention tighter, phones coming out to capture quotes and figures that would become headlines within the hour. Walsh continued through details about implementation timelines and expected operational improvements before introducing Andre in language that made his background sound more impressive than it had felt while living through it. Please welcome Andre Morrison, who will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer for Titan Logistics North America Division, effective immediately. Andre stepped to the podium, aware of how many eyes were tracking his movement, how many cameras were capturing this moment for reproduction in contexts he could not control. He had prepared brief remarks the night before in the hotel room, typing them into his phone between moments of staring at the ceiling and processing everything that had ended and everything that was beginning. Thank you. This deal represents 3 years of work by teams across both organizations who believed we could build something that creates real value for communities, not just shareholders. Titan Logistics will be hiring 2,000 people over the next 18 months, with priority given to candidates from neighborhoods where opportunity has been scarce, but talent has never been lacking. We're committing 45% of new supplier contracts to minority-owned businesses because diversity in partnership creates resilience in outcomes. And we're establishing apprenticeship programs in 5 cities to ensure that the next generation of logistics professionals includes people who might not have traditional credentials, but do have drive and potential. The words came out steady, despite the surreal quality of standing in front of microphones, discussing initiatives worth tens of millions of dollars, while his marriage was dissolving through paperwork that reduced a decade to asset division and separation dates. Questions came quickly once he opened the floor, reporters asking about implementation challenges and competitive positioning and market projections. Andre answered each one directly, leading with substance rather than corporate speak, treating the journalists like intelligent adults who could handle complexity rather than audiences who needed sound bites. Then came the question he had been expecting since the moment Simone slid those papers across the counter. "Mr. Morrison, there are reports that you recently filed for divorce. Can you comment on the timing relative to this announcement?" The room shifted perceptibly, attention sharpening as everyone recognized the human interest angle that could turn a business story into something that traveled beyond the finance section. Andre felt the weight of how he answered, knowing that whatever he said would define the narrative Simone would have to navigate when the story reached people who knew them both. "My personal relationships aren't newsworthy. This deal is about families who will have stable work because of decisions made in boardrooms like this one. That's what deserves attention, and what I'm prepared to discuss."
The reporter pressed, as reporters do when they sense there might be more to extract.
"But the timing seems unusual. The divorce filing appears to have happened just hours after—"
Andre cut through the fishing expedition with steel wrapped in courtesy.
"I've addressed that question. Next, please."
Walsh stepped forward, with the practiced ease of someone who had managed media for decades, redirecting toward questions about market share and growth projections until the energy around Andre's personal life dissipated back into professional curiosity. The press conference wrapped at 11:15, with handshakes and business cards exchanged, camera crews packing up equipment while producers reviewed footage to determine which clips would make the noon broadcasts.
Andre stood near the windows afterward, looking out over Lake Michigan while Walsh handled follow-up conversations with reporters who wanted additional background for longer features. The water stretched toward a horizon that disappeared into haze. Boats cutting across surfaces that looked calm from 41 floors up, but were probably choppy enough to make for uncomfortable sailing. Somewhere out there, Simone was having a morning that was about to become the worst day of her life, though she would not know it for approximately 6 more minutes. Across the city, Simone Morrison woke to sunlight that felt deserved, warmth that seemed to validate decisions she had made after months of building toward the courage required to end something that should have ended years ago. The bed felt larger without Andre in it, spacious in ways that promised freedom from compromise and accommodation. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, scrolling through messages that had accumulated overnight from friends she had texted after he left. Supportive responses that confirmed she had done the right thing by choosing herself over a marriage that had stopped serving either of them. The shower in the master bathroom ran at the temperature she preferred without negotiation, hot enough to turn skin pink and steam up mirrors until the bathroom felt like a sauna. Simone took her time getting ready, applying makeup with the precision of someone who had learned that presentation mattered almost as much as performance in corporate environments where women were evaluated by standards men never had to consider. The navy dress she chose projected competence and confidence in equal measure, paired with heels that added 3 inches and the authority that came with looking people directly in the eye rather than up at them. Coffee tasted better than it had in weeks, brewed in a kitchen where she would no longer have to navigate around someone else's morning routine or clean up after someone else's careless use of counter space. Simone carried the mug to the table where the divorce papers still sat in their manila envelope, visible reminder of action taken and future reclaimed. She took a photo of herself holding the coffee, morning light coming through the window behind her in ways that made her look radiant, and posted it to Instagram with a caption about new beginnings and choosing happiness. The drive to her office in Schaumburg took 40 minutes through traffic that moved in waves, stopping and starting with the rhythm of commuters who who had made this journey so many times they could probably do it blindfolded. Simone worked for a pharmaceutical marketing firm that occupied the 14th floor of a building surrounded by parking lots and chain restaurants. The kind of suburban corporate park that could have been anywhere in America, based solely on architecture and landscaping choices. She parked in her assigned spot and took the elevator up with 3 colleagues she recognized, but did not know well enough to engage beyond brief greetings. Her office was a cube with partial walls that gave the illusion of privacy, while ensuring everyone remained visible to everyone else, a design philosophy that claimed to encourage collaboration, but mostly just prevented people from relaxing completely. Simone logged into her computer and checked email, clearing overnight messages from clients on the East Coast who started their days early enough to expect responses before lunch. The morning passed in meetings about campaign performance and budget allocations, familiar rhythms that felt comforting in their predictability. At 9, she took a break to visit the break room, where several coworkers were already gathered around the coffee maker, discussing weekend plans and complaining about workload in the tone people use when they need to vent but do not actually want solutions. Jessica, from Accounts Receivable, noticed Simone first, her expression shifting from casual friendliness to something more complex. "Simone, hey, how are you? I saw your post this morning." Simone smiled with the confidence of someone who had made a difficult decision and was already feeling lighter for it. "I'm good. Really good. It was time." The other women offered murmurs of support, the kind of generic encouragement that costs nothing and requires no follow-up. They asked appropriate questions about logistics and living arrangements, conversations Simone navigated with practiced ease while making her coffee exactly how she liked it. She returned to her desk feeling validated by their responses, confirmed in her choice by people who barely knew her marriage but were willing to agree it had run its course. The calendar on her screen showed meetings stacked through lunch, campaign reviews that would require her full attention, and the kind of strategic thinking that had earned her the senior marketing manager title she wore like armor against anyone who might question her competence. Simone pulled up the first presentation, reviewing slides that pitched a new product launch to a client whose budget could fund her salary for 3 years if they spent it all with her firm. At 10:17, Jessica appeared at the entrance to her cube, moving with the kind of urgency that suggested something had happened that required immediate attention. Her face carried an expression Simone could not quite read, somewhere between shock and concern, and something that might have been pity. "Simone, is your husband Andre Morrison?" The question landed strangely, past tense applied to a present that had only just shifted into being past. "Ex-husband. Almost. Why?" Jessica turned her laptop so the screen faced Simone, her hands shaking slightly in ways that suggested whatever she was about to reveal was significant enough to break through professional composure. The Chicago Tribune business section filled the display, a headline in bold text above a photograph that made Simone's vision narrow until the room around her disappeared into peripheral blur. Titan Logistics announces $700 million acquisition, names new CEO. The photo showed Andre shaking hands with Richard Walsh, both men smiling in front of the company logo and American flags that communicated gravitas and legitimacy. Andre looked different than he had 12 hours earlier in their kitchen, his posture straighter and his expression carrying authority Simone had never associated with the man who came home exhausted every night from work she had stopped asking about years ago. The words beneath the image swam as Simone tried to focus on them, her brain refusing to process information that contradicted everything she had built her divorce on. Deal finalized Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. Andre Morrison, 39, to lead North America division. $700 million acquisition of Morrison Optimization Systems. Revolutionary supply chain technology developed over 3 years. Hiring 2,000 employees across 5 states. Time seemed to stop and accelerate simultaneously, seconds stretching into hours, while hours collapsed into moments that Simone could not reconcile with the timeline she thought she understood. Tuesday morning. 11 a.m., the day before she handed him divorce papers. The hours before she called him worthless and going nowhere and stuck in the same place he had been for a decade. Her phone began vibrating on the desk, the screen lighting up with incoming calls and text messages that multiplied faster than she could track. Her mother's name appeared 3 times in rapid succession, each call going to voicemail as Simone stared at the laptop screen, unable to move or speak or process what she was seeing. Jessica hovered uncertainly at the cube entrance, her voice coming from somewhere far away, despite being less than 3 feet from Simone's chair. "Simone? Did you know?" The question penetrated the fog slowly, reaching Simone through layers of shock that insulated her from immediate reaction. Did she know? Did she know that her husband had built something worth $700 million? Did she know that while she was comparing him unfavorably to her friends' husbands with their flashy cars and expensive vacations, he was negotiating the kind of deal that made headlines in national business publications? Did she know that every late night she had dismissed as failure was actually him building an empire so quietly she never heard it coming? Simone shook her head, the movement small and automatic. No, I didn't." Other coworkers were gathering now, drawn by whatever energy had shifted in the office atmosphere, that collective sense that something significant was happening that everyone needed to witness. Someone had pulled the article up on the large monitor in the common area, Andre's face now 6 feet tall and impossible to ignore. Whispers moved through the space like wind through trees, words Simone could not quite make out, but whose meaning came through clearly in tone and cadence. Her phone continued vibrating, messages stacking up from numbers she recognized and many she did not. Friends from college who had not contacted her in years suddenly interested in reconnecting. Former co-workers who wanted to congratulate her on the marriage they assumed was still intact. Acquaintances who had seen the news and wanted to know if it was real, if this was really her Andre, if she had any idea this was coming. Through the shock, a single thought crystallized with the clarity of truth that could not be denied no matter how much she might want to reject it. 12 hours. The deal had closed 12 hours before she gave him those papers. While she was preparing her speech about his failures and her sacrifices and his refusal to build anything meaningful, he had already built something that would employ thousands of people and change an industry. Jessica was speaking again, her voice penetrating the fog with questions Simone could not answer, because the answers required admitting things she was not ready to admit, even to herself. "When did you sign the divorce papers?" Simone's throat felt tight, words coming out smaller than she intended. "Last night, around midnight." Jessica's expression shifted into something that looked uncomfortably like pity, mixed with the kind of fascination people feel watching car accidents they did not cause but cannot look away from. Oh no. The full weight of timing settled over Simone like concrete, heavy and inescapable. The deal closed Tuesday at 11 a.m. She handed him papers Tuesday at 11:30 p.m. 12.5 hours between his biggest professional achievement and her final personal rejection. 12.5 hours during which he knew what was coming and said nothing. Let her call him worthless and going nowhere without defending himself or correcting her assumptions or telling her the truth that would have changed everything. Her manager appeared at her cube, his expression professional but strained in ways that suggested he had been told to handle a situation he had not anticipated needing to handle on a random Wednesday in October. "Simone, can we talk in my office?" She followed him on legs that felt disconnected from conscious control, moving through the office space while dozens of eyes tracked her progress with the kind of attention people give to things they will discuss later when the subject of that discussion is no longer present. His office had walls that went to the ceiling and a door that closed completely, luxuries of rank that Simone had aspired to and now could not appreciate through the numbness spreading through her chest. He sat behind his desk and gestured for her to take the chair across from him, his movements careful in ways that suggested he had been trained in how to deliver difficult news to employees who might react unpredictably. "Is there something you need to tell me?" Simone swallowed against the tightness in her throat, buying time she could not actually use because there was no version of this conversation that ended well. "No. I didn't know. About the deal. I had no idea." He nodded, his expression neutral in ways that felt worse than judgment would have. "All right. I just wanted to check. Some clients are asking questions, and I wanted to make sure we're on the same page about how to respond." The words took a moment to penetrate fully. Clients asking questions. About her. About her connection to Andre Morrison, CEO of Titan Logistics North America, the man she had just divorced because she thought he would never amount to anything. Clients wondering whether she had inside information or special access or connections that might be valuable to their business relationships with her firm. I understand. But she did not understand, not really, could not grasp the full scope of how thoroughly her world had shifted in the 17 minutes since Jessica had shown her that screen. She left his office and returned to her cube, where her computer monitor still displayed the campaign presentation she had been reviewing when everything changed. The slides about pharmaceutical marketing and target demographics looked absurd now, trivial in ways that made her previous certainty about their importance seem like delusion. Simone grabbed her purse and left the office without explanation, moving through hallways and elevator banks and parking lots without remembering any of the transitions between them. Her car felt like sanctuary, private space where she could finally let her face show what she was feeling without worrying about who might witness it or what conclusions they might draw. The Tribune article loaded on her phone screen with details that made everything worse because they were not abstract. 3 years of negotiations. Technology Andre had developed starting long before the divorce had even been a consideration. Board meetings and due diligence and legal reviews that had consumed the hours she thought he was wasting chasing opportunities that would never materialize. Every late night had been real work. Every exhausted expression had been earned effort. Every moment she had dismissed as failure had actually been foundation for success she had been too focused on comparison to recognize. Her phone rang with her mother's number, the 4th attempt at contact in 20 minutes. Simone answered because ignoring it would only delay a conversation that had to happen eventually. The voice on the other end carried a tone Simone had never heard before, something between fury and disbelief. "Tell me you knew. Tell me you knew about this before you signed those papers." Simone could not speak past the tightness in her chest, the weight of having to admit the truth to someone who had encouraged the divorce as an act of self-preservation and strength. "I didn't know. He never told me." Her mother's silence lasted long enough to communicate judgment more effectively than words could have. When she finally spoke, the disappointment landed like physical force. "You left him the day before this announcement went public? After 10 years of marriage, you walked away 12 hours after he signed a $700 million deal?" "I didn't know." "That's the problem, Simone. You didn't know because you never asked. You were so busy deciding he was a failure that you never looked at what he was actually doing." The accusation hit harder because it was true. Undeniable truth that Simone could not deflect or rationalize away, no matter how desperately she wanted to find some version of events where she had not destroyed her own life through assumptions that had felt like certainty until they collided with reality. "I have to go." She ended the call before her mother could say anything else, before words could be spoken that would make this moment even more permanent than it already felt. The parking lot around her looked exactly as it had 40 minutes earlier, when she had arrived at work thinking today would be unremarkable. Just another Wednesday of meetings and emails and the comfortable routine of a life she had thought she understood. Simone pulled out of the parking space and drove without destination, moving through suburban streets that all looked identical in their careful landscaping and chain retail stores. She ended up at the house without consciously choosing to go there, muscle memory guiding her to the place that had been home for 8 years, but would not be for much longer based on agreements signed the night before. The kitchen looked exactly as she had left it that morning, the manila envelope still on the counter where she had placed it after Andre signed. Simone picked up the papers and read through them slowly, seeing clauses about asset division and property settlement that had seemed straightforward 12 hours ago, but now represented the worst financial decision she would ever make. The divorce lawyer's number was saved in her phone from the consultations that had led to this moment. Conversations where Simone had laid out her concerns about supporting a man who was not providing the life she deserved. She called it now with hands that shook badly enough to make dialing difficult, her breathing uneven as the phone rang 3 times before connecting. Patterson and Associates, how may I help you? Simone's voice came out strained, barely recognizable to her own ears. This is Simone Morrison. I need to speak with Mr. Patterson immediately. It's an emergency. The receptionist put her through without the usual screening, some quality in Simone's tone communicating genuine urgency rather than client hyperbole. Patterson's voice came through calm and professional, the tone of someone who dealt with marital crises frequently enough that individual cases rarely penetrated his professional detachment. Mrs. Morrison, what can I do for you? I need to stop the divorce, right now, whatever it takes. The papers were signed last night, but they haven't been filed yet, right? We can still reverse this? Patterson's pause lasted long enough to communicate that the answer would not be what Simone desperately needed it to be. Mrs. Morrison, I filed the papers this morning at 8 a.m. as we discussed. The divorce is now in the court system. The words landed like blows, each syllable driving home the irreversibility of decisions that could not be undone through wanting them undone badly enough. But there's been a development, a significant one. My husband just announced a $700 million acquisition. The deal closed yesterday morning before I signed the papers. That changes the asset division, right? That has to change everything? Another pause, this one carrying the weight of calculations being performed and conclusions being reached that would not favor the person asking the questions. Mrs. Morrison, what time did you sign the divorce papers last night? Around midnight, maybe 11:45? And you said the acquisition closed yesterday morning? 11 a.m. The press conference just happened. Patterson's exhale communicated the bad news before his words made it explicit. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Morrison, but the timing is clear. The acquisition was finalized at 11 a.m. Tuesday. You signed divorce papers at 11:45 p.m. Tuesday. That's 12 hours and 45 minutes after the deal became legally binding. Under Illinois law, any assets acquired during the period between separation agreement and final divorce decree are considered post-separation property, unless there was prior written agreement otherwise. Simone felt the room tilting, her vision narrowing to a point that made everything peripheral disappear into darkness. What does that mean? It means the $700 million acquisition is considered your ex-husband's separate property. You have no legal claim to any portion of those funds or the equity position he received as part of the deal. The asset division we outlined in the divorce papers stands as written. That can't be right. We were still married when he signed that deal. Legally married. That has to count for something. Patterson's voice remained professional despite what had to be recognition of the magnitude of what his client had just lost through timing that could not have been more precisely devastating. Legally married, yes, but separated by signed agreement. The moment you both signed those papers, you entered a separation period. The courts consider that separation to have begun at the moment of signature, which retroactively applies to any assets acquired that same day if they were not disclosed during the divorce proceedings. Your ex-husband was under no legal obligation to disclose negotiations or pending deals, only completed assets as of the filing date. Simone's legs gave out, her body sliding down the kitchen cabinet until she was sitting on the floor with her back against the wood and her phone pressed to her ear, while her lawyer explained in precise legal terminology exactly how thoroughly she had destroyed her own life. Can we contest it? Challenge the timing somehow? Argue that he should have disclosed the negotiations? We can certainly try, but I would not recommend it. First, it would be expensive litigation with very low probability of success. Second, and more importantly, it would expose you to counter-arguments about your knowledge of his work. Did you know he was in acquisition talks? No. Did you ever ask about his work? Request to see financial projections or business plans or meeting schedules? Simone thought of 10 years of dismissing his explanations, cutting him off when he tried to discuss projects, refusing to attend his work events because they did not involve people she thought mattered. No. Then any legal challenge would likely establish that you showed willful disinterest in your spouse's professional activities. That would not reflect favorably on claims that he deliberately hid information you never attempted to discover. My professional recommendation is that you accept the asset division as written and move forward. Move forward into a future where she had given up a marriage to a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars because she thought he would never amount to anything. Move forward knowing that every person who learned this story would judge her for impatience and superficiality and failure to recognize value when it was sitting across from her at the breakfast table every morning. How much do I get from the current asset division? Patterson's pause suggested he was reviewing documents, though more likely he was just giving her time to prepare for numbers that would sound absurd compared to what she could have had if she had signed those papers 48 hours earlier or later. Based on the marital assets as of the separation date, you would receive approximately $42,000 from the house sale proceeds after the mortgage is satisfied, plus your own retirement account, which has about $38,000 in it. Total assets divided would be approximately $80,000. $80,000 versus a percentage of $700 million that would have been hers if she had waited one more day, if she had asked one more question, if she had shown even the slightest bit of patience or curiosity or willingness to see her husband as something other than a disappointment that needed to be corrected or abandoned. Simone ended the call without saying goodbye, her phone falling from numb fingers to land on the tile floor with a crack that probably meant the screen was damaged, but felt like appropriate symbolism for everything breaking at once. She sat there on the kitchen floor where Andre had signed both sets of papers in the same black ink using the same steady hand, and let the full weight of consequences crush down on her with the force of choices that could not be unmade, no matter how desperately she wished she could go back 24 hours and handle everything differently. The house was silent except for the hum of appliances and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. Ordinary sounds of ordinary life continuing around her, while her own life disintegrated into the kind of cautionary tale people would tell to illustrate the cost of judging too quickly and assuming too confidently. She had lost everything that mattered by focusing exclusively on everything that did not. And Andre had known. That was the part that made it unbearable. He had known when she called him worthless, known when she said he was going nowhere, known when she listed all his failures and her sacrifices and the reasons she deserved better than what he could provide. He had sat there with the knowledge that he had just signed a $700 million deal and let her believe he was exactly the failure she had decided he was. Because if she loved him, the number would not have mattered. That truth settled over everything else, undeniable and brutal. If she had loved him for who he was rather than what he might become, or what he could provide, or how he compared to other people's husbands, she would have stayed regardless of the bank balance. The fact that she was sitting here devastated by timing rather than by the loss of the man himself told her everything she needed to know about who she had been during their marriage. Simone stayed on that kitchen floor until the afternoon light shifted through windows and her legs cramped from sitting in one position too long. When she finally stood, using the counter for support, she caught her reflection in the window glass and barely recognized the woman staring back. Same face, same navy dress, Same carefully applied makeup. But everything underneath had changed in ways that would take years to fully process, and possibly a lifetime to forgive. Her phone buzzed with messages she could not bring herself to read, notifications piling up from people who wanted to be part of the story or offer sympathy or ask questions they had no right to ask. The only person who might have answered those questions honestly was probably in a boardroom somewhere, celebrating the biggest professional achievement of his life, surrounded by people who had believed in his potential when his own wife had not. The evening news would probably lead with the acquisition announcement. Social media would dissect the divorce timing with the cruel efficiency of strangers who loved watching other people's failures because it made their own lives feel more successful by comparison. And Simone would have to navigate all of it, knowing that every bit of judgment she received was deserved, earned through a decade of small dismissals that had accumulated into the catastrophic decision to leave exactly when she should have stayed. She left the house as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple that looked too beautiful for a day this devastating, driving to a hotel because she could not bear to spend another night surrounded by memories of a marriage she had destroyed through assumptions that had felt like certainty until reality proved otherwise. The room she checked into was generic and clean and exactly what she deserved. Anonymous space where she could be no one to nobody until she figured out how to rebuild a life from ruins she had created herself. Thursday morning arrived 2 weeks after the press conference, and Andre stood in front of a converted warehouse on the south side of Chicago that had been empty for 3 years before Titan Logistics purchased it for purposes the previous owners would never have imagined. The building had housed manufacturing equipment decades ago, then served briefly as storage before economic shifts left it abandoned to accumulate dust and the particular decay that comes from disuse rather than disaster. The sign above the entrance read, Morrison Family Tech Center, in letters large enough to be visible from the street, honoring his father in ways that mattered more than monuments or plaques. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed through weeks of renovation, industrial space becoming classrooms and computer labs where hands-on learning could happen alongside theoretical instruction. 60 desks arranged in clusters that encouraged collaboration, walls painted in colors chosen specifically to combat institutional gray. Equipment filled every station, computers and software and tools that gave students access to technology they would be expected to use professionally but might never encounter otherwise. The first cohort of apprentices would arrive Monday morning, 60 young people from neighborhoods where opportunity had been scarce, but talent had never been lacking. Andre had reviewed every application personally, reading through essays about why logistics mattered and what candidates hoped to build, looking for evidence of hunger that could not be manufactured. Walsh appeared, carrying coffee in paper cups that steamed against the October chill. Your father would have appreciated this. Andre accepted the coffee without breaking his survey of the space. He used to say the best investment was in people who would remember you taught them something useful, not people who would remember you gave them money. They walked through the facility together, Walsh pointing out features added based on education specialist recommendations, while Andre noted things still needing refinement. The conversations stayed practical, focused on logistics rather than the personal upheaval that had happened in parallel with professional triumph. Walsh had not asked about the divorce beyond initial acknowledgement, respecting boundaries Andre appreciated more than sympathy would have earned. By noon, Walsh had departed to other meetings, leaving Andre alone in space that smelled like fresh paint. He sat at one of the student desks, chair slightly too small for his frame, imagining what Monday would feel like when these rooms filled with people whose lives might shift trajectories based on what happened here. His phone buzzed with updates and approvals, the constant flow of communication that came with authority he was still learning to wear comfortably. Buried in the messages was a text from Sarah Mitchell, the teacher he had met during curriculum development meetings for a pilot program at her high school. Community Center hosting volunteer appreciation dinner Saturday. Thought you might want to attend since your company sponsored the youth employment program. No pressure if busy. Andre considered whether attending was appropriate given his divorce was barely finalized. But the event was professional, focused on community impact rather than personal connection. I'll be there. What time? 6 p.m. Fair warning, the food is always terrible, but the company makes up for it. Saturday evening arrived with temperature dropping toward the 40s and wind off the lake that made standing outside feel like punishment. Andre drove to the community center in South Shore, a neighborhood that had seen better economic days but retained tight-knit social structure that money could not buy. The building looked like every community center he had ever seen. Practical architecture focused on function over form. Inside, folding tables had been arranged cafeteria style, covered with paper tablecloths held down by centerpieces that looked assembled by enthusiastic volunteers with limited budgets. Sarah stood near the entrance, talking with an older woman whose animated gestures suggested she was recounting a story requiring dramatic emphasis. When she noticed Andre, Sarah excused herself and approached with a smile that reached her eyes. "You actually came. I half expected you to bail once you realized how unglamorous community service can be." Andre glanced around at the room filling with people whose clothing ranged from business casual to work uniforms still bearing name tags. "I grew up in rooms exactly like this one. Nothing unglamorous about doing actual work that helps actual people." Something in Sarah's expression shifted, approval mixed with recognition. "Good answer. Come on, I'll introduce you to people who make this place run, despite having zero budget and infinite obstacles." The evening unfolded in conversations with volunteers who coordinated after-school programs and job training initiatives and food distribution networks. Andre listened more than he spoke, asking questions about challenges and resource needs, while mentally cataloging ways Titan Logistics funding could address specific problems. The food was indeed terrible, dry chicken and overcooked vegetables, but the atmosphere carried warmth expensive catering could never purchase. Sarah found him near the dessert table, where someone had arranged store-bought cookies on a platter. "So, what do you actually do? I know you work in logistics, but that covers everything from warehouse management to rocket science." Andre selected a chocolate chip cookie more out of social obligation than hunger. "I help companies move products from point A to point B more efficiently. Sounds boring when you say it out loud." Everything sounds boring when you strip it down to basics. Teaching is just talking at people who would rather be looking at their phones. But the boring version ignores why it matters. He found himself interested in where she was leading this. "Why does teaching matter to you?" Sarah leaned against the table, considering her answer with deliberation, suggesting she had thought about this question before. "Because a good teacher can show you that you're capable of more than you thought possible. And once you see that about yourself, it changes everything else." They talked for another hour about education philosophy and community needs and the gap between what institutions claim to provide versus what actually reached people who needed it most. Sarah asked about his background without performative interest, genuinely curious about how someone ended up running a corporate division while maintaining perspective that brought them to volunteer appreciation dinners at underfunded community centers. When the evening ended and people began stacking chairs, Sarah walked him to the parking lot under streetlights that flickered with inconsistency of infrastructure, awaiting repair budgets that never materialized. "This was good. I'm glad you came." Andre agreed honestly, surprised by how much he had needed an evening focused on something other than acquisition integration and media management. "Same time next month?" Sarah's smile carried genuine pleasure. "I'll hold you to that." Across the city, in a studio apartment that cost more per month than she should have been spending given her current employment status, Simone Morrison sat on a futon, trying to compose an email she had rewritten 17 times. The laptop showed a draft message to her manager explaining why she needed to resign from a position she had already effectively lost. The pharmaceutical marketing firm had been professional about suggesting she take a leave of absence, framing it as compassionate support during difficult personal time, rather than acknowledging that her presence created awkwardness for clients who could not separate her from the story that had spread through business networks with the speed of particularly juicy gossip. The email she finally sent was brief and professional, thanking them for opportunities provided and understanding shown, requesting that her resignation be effective immediately. She hit send before reconsidering, watching the message disappear. Her phone sat silent beside her, notifications disabled after the first week when volume of messages had become unbearable. Friends who wanted details for social currency. Former colleagues who claimed concern but really wanted confirmation the story was as bad as it sounded. Family members who oscillated between sympathy and judgment. The only person who had not contacted her was Andre, which made sense given he had nothing to say and she had no right to expect otherwise. Thursday morning brought Simone's first appointment with a therapist whose practice specialized in what the website euphemistically called life transitions and self-discovery. Dr. Lisa Chen worked out of an office in Lincoln Park that smelled like lavender and featured carefully curated calming aesthetic, soft lighting, muted earth tones, comfortable chairs positioned to encourage conversation without forcing eye contact. Dr. Chen was younger than Simone expected, probably early 40s, with an expression that managed to convey both professional distance and genuine interest. "Tell me about the divorce." Simone had prepared for this question, rehearsed versions that positioned her sympathetically while acknowledging mistakes. But sitting in that chair across from someone whose job was to see through self-protective narrative, the rehearsed version felt inadequate. "I left my husband because I thought he was going nowhere. Turns out, he was going somewhere pretty significant, and I just never bothered to ask where." Dr. Chen made a note, her expression neutral. "How does that make you feel? Like I wasted 10 years measuring everything wrong? Like I was so busy comparing our life to everyone else's that I never actually looked at what we had? What was visible to you?" Simone thought about Instagram feeds and vacation photos and engagement rings that caught light in ways designed to photograph well. Success that looked like success. Money that showed. Status that other people recognized. And what did your husband have that wasn't visible? The question forced Simone to articulate what she had been avoiding. Integrity? Patience? The ability to work towards something for years without needing anyone to validate that the work mattered. Character. Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly. What did you value about yourself during your marriage? The question hit differently than anything Simone had expected, requiring her to turn analysis inward. I don't know. I think I valued being seen as successful, having a life that looked good to other people. And before you started measuring success by other people's standards, what did you value? Simone opened her mouth to answer and found she had nothing to say. The silence stretched uncomfortably long before she finally admitted truth lurking underneath everything else. I have no idea. I don't think I ever knew. The session continued for another 40 minutes, excavating layers of comparison and competition and fear that had shaped decisions Simone had believed were about self-preservation, but were actually about avoiding discomfort of being ordinary. Dr. Chen assigned homework, asking Simone to write about who she wanted to be, independent of who she thought she should be. The following Tuesday, Simone started volunteering at a homeless shelter in Englewood. The facility operated in a former school building, dormitory-style rooms for families and individuals experiencing homelessness for reasons ranging from economic hardship to mental health crises to domestic violence escape. She served meals during dinner shift, standing behind steam tables, ladling soup, and distributing bread to people who thanked her with sincerity, suggesting gratitude was not yet cynicism corroded. A woman named Maria sat down to eat at one of the long tables, her face showing weathering that came from years of outdoor exposure and insufficient nutrition. She noticed Simone's wedding ring tan line. Recently divorced? Simone nodded, surprised by the observation. Me too. Lost everything in the split. House, savings, custody of my kids for a while until I got stable. The matter-of-fact delivery suggested Maria had told this story enough times that emotion had been processed out. I'm sorry. That sounds incredibly difficult. Maria shrugged, spooning soup efficiently. It was. Still is some days. But I learned who I was when I had nothing. Turns out that was worth more than the house. The words lodged somewhere in Simone's chest, a perspective she had not considered because she had been too focused on what she had lost to think about what losing everything might reveal. Simone continued volunteering 3 evenings a week, finding something stabilizing in routine of showing up and doing simple work that helped people whose needs were immediate and whose gratitude was genuine. No one asked about her story beyond surface pleasantries, and the anonymity felt like relief. 6 months passed in rhythm of therapy sessions and volunteer shifts and job applications to positions that paid a fraction of what she had earned before, but offered meaningful work that did not leave her feeling hollow. Simone moved into a smaller apartment in Rogers Park, trading square footage and granite countertops for affordability and proximity to the lake, where she started taking morning walks. The April Volunteer Appreciation Dinner featured a speaker from Morrison Family Tech Center discussing employment programs and apprenticeship opportunities. Simone attended because she volunteered regularly enough that skipping would have been noticed, not because she expected to see Andre. But he was there, standing near the back, listening with focused attention, suggesting genuine interest rather than polite obligation. Simone recognized him despite the months since she had last seen him, his posture unchanged by wealth that could have transformed how he moved through the world. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt, dressed for blending in rather than standing out. Their eyes met across the room during applause, a moment of recognition that could have been avoided if either had looked away quickly enough, but neither did. Andre's expression remained neutral, not hostile, but not welcoming either. Careful blank, suggesting he was deciding how to handle an encounter he had not planned for, but was prepared to manage. Simone approached slowly, giving him opportunity to escape if he chose, but he remained where he was. "Hi, Andre," he responded with her name, delivered in tone that was polite, but not warm. "Simone." "I didn't know you'd be here. I volunteer at the shelter." "Good. They do important work." The conversation felt like navigating a minefield where every word could detonate awkwardness lying dormant. Simone pushed forward despite risk, needing to say things she had been rehearsing for months. "Can I just say something? I know I don't have the right to take up your time, but if you'll give me a minute, I promise I won't ask for anything beyond that." Andre's expression shifted slightly, curiosity or courtesy allowing her space to speak. "Okay." Simone took a breath, committing to honesty that cost pride but might purchase something more valuable. "I was wrong. About everything. You were never the problem with our marriage. My fear was. My need to compare and compete and measure worth by what other people could see. I spent 10 years dismissing you because you didn't fit the image I thought I needed to project. I'm not saying this because I want another chance or because I think apologizing fixes anything. I'm saying it because you deserve to know that I understand now what I couldn't see then." Andre listened without interrupting, his face unreadable in ways making clear he had learned to guard reactions in settings where showing too much could be used against you. "I appreciate you saying that." Simone waited for more, for absolution or anger or anything suggesting her words had landed with weight they carried for her. But Andre remained quiet. "I wrote you 47 letters. Never sent any of them, because apologies that expect something in return aren't really apologies. That's growth." The simple acknowledgement felt like more validation than Simone had received in months. "I'm glad you're building things that matter. The tech center, the community programs. It's exactly what someone with your resources should be doing." Andre's expression softened slightly, guard dropping just enough to reveal something underneath. "My father used to say that the measure of success isn't what you accumulate. It's what you build that lasts after you're gone. They stood in silence for a moment. Two people who had shared a decade navigating strange territory of being strangers who knew intimate details about each other's lives, but no longer had claim to continued involvement. Can we try again? The question escaped before Simone could stop it, hope overriding wisdom she had been trying to cultivate. Andre's response came without hesitation, gentle but absolute. No. The single word carried finality, leaving no room for negotiation. Simone felt tears building, but refused to let them fall. I understand. Simone, you left when you thought I had nothing. That tells me everything I need to know about what mattered most. I don't blame you for that, but I can't trust it won't happen again if circumstances change. The honesty cut deeper than cruelty would have. You're right. I can't promise I wouldn't repeat the same patterns. I'm still figuring out who I am without comparison defining me. Andre nodded, something like respect crossing his features. Then keep doing that work. For yourself. Not for me or any future relationship. Just for you. He extended his hand, formal gesture marking boundary between what they had been and what they would be going forward. Simone shook it, feeling finality of contact that said goodbye without saying the word. I wish you well. I mean that. Andre walked toward the exit where Sarah waited with car keys in hand. Simone watched him leave, feeling weight of closure that came without reconciliation, ending without resolution beyond mutual acknowledgement that some doors closed permanently. She left the building as sunset painted the sky in shades too beautiful for a day this devastating. A young woman excitedly talked to friends near the entrance. My boyfriend works all the time, never makes time for me. Should I leave? Simone stopped. She knew that crossroads. Can I ask you something? Does he work constantly and ignore you? Or does he work constantly while you ignore his work? The woman paused. I never asked what he actually does. Simone felt something settle in her chest, purpose found in unlikely moment. Ask him, tonight. Listen not for what you want to hear, but for what he's trying to build. She walked to her car feeling lighter than she had in months. At least one person would not make her mistake. By October, exactly 1 year after the divorce papers were signed, Andre stood at his father's grave in Oakwood Cemetery on the south side. Spring had given way to summer, had given way to fall again, seasons cycling through their patterns while life reorganized itself around new foundations. He placed fresh flowers in the vase attached to the headstone, yellow roses that had been his father's favorite. The stone was simple, name and dates and a single line. He built for others what others would not build for themselves. Andre pulled his father's journal from his jacket pocket, pages worn from repeated reading. He opened to an entry from 15 years earlier. Son, the world will doubt you. That's guaranteed. The question is whether you'll doubt yourself. Your mother left because she needed proof before she could offer belief. I don't blame her for that. But I learned something important. The people who matter are the ones who stay during uncertainty, not the ones who arrive after success proves itself. He read the entry aloud to empty space and a headstone that could not respond, finding comfort in ritual of speaking to someone who could no longer hear, but whose wisdom continued shaping decisions. I finally understand. The Morrison Center graduated its third cohort last month. 60 more apprentices entering careers that will support families. Some are better at this than people with fancy degrees and connections. You knew potential isn't distributed according to zip codes. I'm just proving it with numbers they can't ignore. A breeze moved through the cemetery, carrying the scent of October leaves and soil preparing for winter. Andre closed the journal and stood in silence for a moment longer. Sarah was waiting by the car when he returned, giving him privacy for conversations requiring solitude. She smiled when he approached. "You okay?" Andre nodded, finding truth in the simple question. "Yeah, just making sure the work honors what he taught me." They drove back toward the city through traffic that was light for a Saturday afternoon, windows down to let fall air circulate. Sarah asked about the upcoming graduation ceremony, whether he planned to speak. "I want to tell them that someone believing in their potential before they proved it changed everything. That this program was designed to say, we see who you could become if someone gave you the tools and chance." Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand briefly, contact communicating support without requiring words. They spent the afternoon at Navy Pier watching tourists feed seagulls and children eat cotton candy, ordinary Saturday activities that felt remarkable precisely because they were not. Evening arrived with sunset making the lake look like it was on fire, orange and pink bleeding across water. "Does it bother you that people know about your divorce? The timing?" Andre considered the question honestly. "It bothered me at first. Felt like failure everyone could see. But over time, I realized it was just truth. We made choices based on who we were and what we valued. The timing made those choices visible in ways that were embarrassing for her and uncomfortable for me. But it didn't change the fundamental reality that we wanted different things." "Do you regret not telling her about the deal before she filed?" "Sometime, but then I remember that if she loved me, the number wouldn't have mattered. And if the number was what made her want to stay, then staying would have been for the wrong reasons." Sarah nodded slowly. "That takes strength. Letting someone walk away when you had the power to make them stay." Andre watched the last light fade from the horizon. "My father taught me that power isn't about what you can make people do. It's about what you choose not to do, even when you could." They sat in comfortable silence as night completed its claim on the sky. Eventually, they walked back to the car and drove to Sarah's apartment in Pilsen, where murals covered brick walls and restaurants served food from countries Andre had never visited, but someday might. Her apartment was small and filled with books that lined walls, floor to ceiling. A cat emerged to investigate the newcomer, rubbing against Andre's legs. "That's Tolstoy. He's terrible at respecting boundaries, but excellent at demanding attention." They talked until past midnight about everything and nothing, conversation ranging from education reform to favorite movies with intellectual rigor, suggesting both had missed having someone who engaged ideas. When Andre finally left, Sarah walked him to the door with Tolstoy trailing behind, making his opinions about the departure known. "I had a really good day." Sarah leaned against the doorframe, her expression open. "Me too. Let's do it again soon." Driving home through city streets quiet with late Saturday stillness, Andre thought about his father's words, about people who stayed during uncertainty versus people who arrived after success proved itself. Sarah had met him at volunteer events, had asked about his work when he was just another person showing up to help. She had valued his perspective before knowing anything about acquisition deals or net worth. That distinction mattered. The people who saw value before success made it visible. Those were the people who mattered. He pulled into his building's parking garage, the condo chosen for proximity to the tech center rather than views or status. Tomorrow he would review graduation speeches and approve hiring projections. But tonight, for this moment, he allowed himself to simply exist without obligation or evaluation. The work was what mattered. The legacy was what mattered. Everything else was just noise, mistaken for signal.